There's one person on earth, that is the African person. And in traveling around the globe, this African finds him and herself in different climates. And because of the nature of the production of vitamin D in the body, it has to begin to regulate itself. So in order to produce vitamin D, this very dark complexion, very curly-haired African begins to depigment itself. And over thousands of years, this very dark complexion, wide-nosed, thick-lipped, very curly-haired African, because of climate, depigments itself, its hair gets straight because of the oils produced with the lack of the sun, its nose gets aquiline, the lips get thin, and over time this African depigments itself into the European. What also helped this African get in very serious trouble was the Wormian Ice Age, which was the last ice age on Earth. This Wormian Ice Age literally chased them into the mountains of northern Europe that we know of today. That would have been where Cheikh Anta Diop says the 51st parallel is. At that point in time, for thousands of years, in the depigmentation process, ice mountains were created. Ice mountains that did not allow Africans to return back into the southern lands. Therefore, they had to retreat into caves and put clothes on. When what is known as an interstadial came, which is a warming trend of the Ice Age, they then found the ability to begin to move further south. As they moved further south on the other side of the ice mountains, where it had been a temperate or a very warm climate, when they got down into the real southern lands here, coming out the Caucasus Mountains, they met upon peoples of different backgrounds. The great majority of them of African descent. Whether you are in Mesopotamia over here, whether you're dealing with any of the Saudi Arabian areas, this is why it's so important to understand that the European, the Eurasian as we know them today, the essence that made Saddam Hussein light complexion was called the Jectanide. Jectanides. That is the formation of the Eurasian coming down, meeting these individuals in Mesopotamia, and getting a first concept of what culture and civilization is. They still couldn't get it too good because they started wars, because this was their manner. They were a very violent people. They were a very dominating people. And so they were kicked out of every town they went to as they were traveling west, and finally they find themselves in Cana, and then they cross over, which then brings this Eurasian into Kemet, and for the first time you see Eurasians in Kemet. This did not happen during the Old Kingdom. This did not happen. This happened during the first intermediate period. The Africans had gone through 6 dynasties prior to the first European of any substance coming into the land to make him or herself feel known. So all this concept about the pyramids, all that's nonsense. And I think that really, as our brother was saying, sure, we got to stop talking on certain levels. I believe that our discussion at this point is counterproductive. See, we're not about asking them, was Egyptians black? That's yesterday's discussion. See, we dealt with that yesterday. Whether or not you're up to the par is your business. Okay, you missed the train. I didn't. I was on that train. And so now we have got to be about the formation of a nation in terms of our thought process. And this is why the Moors become so very important to us, because if you do not understand the Moors, it's very difficult for us as a people to understand why we're in the position that we're in today. You cannot understand why we're in the position we're in today if you don't understand what happened in 1492. You cannot understand what happened in 1492 if you don't understand the Crusades. You cannot understand the Crusades if you don't understand the Moors. Because the very nature of the knowledge that the Crusaders, the Christian Europeans, got of the riches of the East, why Columbus was on the seas in the first place hundreds of years later, was because of what the Moors had brought into Spain. And when you look at European powers, see, here's another way that you can look into it. See, this is why the 2 areas that they want to keep black folk out of in education is social studies and language arts. It's the 2 areas that we have to conquer. Math, science, all that's important, but those are all physical sciences that we can master anyway. But you see, social studies tells you what happened, language arts puts it in a language that tells you what happened. And see, we're not suffering from a misunderstanding of science nor of math. We are suffering from a misunderstanding of ourselves and how to express ourselves, which falls into the category of social studies and language arts. So when I was looking for an area to find myself in Board of Ed, I immediately went to social studies, because I understood that revolutionary things could happen, and they are happening. Because you got to understand the sequence of events in history. You have to see the sequence, and when you see sequence, then everything else comes to be an understanding. The Jectanites coming down into this area then mix with these African folk, and these are the people who would later become the Saddam Husseins, but deeply entrenched in an African thought. See, even Saddam Hussein is an African man, even if not by complexion, which he is by complexion. But even if they were to claim that because of their complexion, they still lived a culture that was African-based, because they as a people had no culture. They brought no culture with them. They brought no formed pattern of behavior, because it was so easy to adapt to the behavior of African people, because that's where the culture was. That's where the civilization was. That's where measurement occurred. And where measurement occurred comes mathematics and science and the formations of technology, and that's what brings the civilization through. So it's important that we understand these things in terms of understanding who we are as a people today. For instance, we teach that the Western civilization is based on the Aristotelian model. Aristotle's model of so-called democracy and all this other stuff that they taught, this is what the Western world is based on. But what they don't tell you is that it was the Moors that translated the works of the Greeks, who then taught the European Aristotle. See, we don't know that. We think that Europeans sat and studied Aristotle. They didn't. They couldn't read. The time of Moorish Spain, 99% of Europe was illiterate. Kings and queens could not read and write. They were living in barns. You see all these castles that they say these kings, those were castles built by Moors that when Europeans moved out and moved further south upon attack by Christians, they took over those. They didn't build those castles and all that other stuff. Moat with alligators. Ain't no alligators in Europe. So how are you even going to put alligators in the moat if you don't have the animal in your backyard in the first place? You see, whenever you see lions, you know you're dealing with Africa, even in The Wizard of Oz. When you hear people saying they threw people to the lions, you know you're dealing with an African concept, if not at least the lions. Because there are no lions anyplace in the world but in Africa. And as you go through Meta Nature, you will see the same thing, okay? As we begin to develop these thoughts, I think that we'll be able to move out. Now, let me ask, because I see some hands just shot up. Will we accept questions? Because normally I just open it up for a discussion. Okay, so we'll go straight, and then I'll give chance for everyone to have their say. Believe me, don't believe a word I say. Not a word. You see, I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to present information, and that's very important. Because too many of us, as we come before you, we get insulted if you don't accept it. See, I don't have no problem because I've done the research. And I know that once you challenge what we say, which I love, I'm going to challenge you to read up on it. And because I know and I'm confident that you're going to come up with the same concepts that I've come up with. We're living an illusion out here. We really are living an illusion. We are living a magician's world, like the Wiz, you know. And people have presented a world to us, and like Wade Noble says, power is the ability to define someone's reality and have them accept that reality. And we are a people who for years people have been defining who we are, and we've been accepting it. Once you tell somebody, no, I don't think that's who I am, they've lost all power over you. Whether you realize or not, and it doesn't make a difference if you're a homeless person in Newark or if you're an IBM executive. Once you say that you don't have the power to define who I am, you've taken all power. Now, they can imprison you, they can physically do things to you, but they have no power over you. Because if you're not afraid of death, then you are the most powerful person around. Because the lack of the fear of death, and I'm not saying not to have a fear of death, because I fear death. I fear things. But I don't ask you measure me by the amount of my fear, judge me by the amount of my courage. Because it's courage that then negates fear. So I'm a human being. In fact, I worry about people who say that they're not afraid of anything. In fact, I try to stay away from people who say they're not afraid, because they put themselves in situations where they really don't care what the outcome is. See, I care about what the outcome is. And I want to teach our children to care about what the outcome is. You see, I'm not a kamikaze. And I'm not a martyr. I want to live. I want to live a long life. As Dr. King said, longevity has its place. You see? I'd like to see my children to be 30 years old. But at the same time, if at that cost it costs me my pride and dignity, you can forget that. You can take this, because I'm going to take at least 6 with me. This is the kind of mentality that we have to face for our future. Because that militia is doing a lot more than what we see in Texas. Believe me that. And let me tell you something else. I'm for gun control. Control your gun. You see, I'm not going to tell our community to sell our guns back when I know that they are collecting guns by the dozens every day. You got to be out of your mind to tell the young people get rid of your guns. You see, because I'm not buying back nothing. Ain't nothing in Toys R Us worth what gun You see what I'm saying? I'm for gun control. In fact, the Constitution almost demands that you bear arms. Okay? So we got to be careful what we tell our children. I'm for gun control. Control your gun. The Moors, as we see them developing and as we look at their development across the world, what we have to do is we have to break it up into certain areas. When we look at this and we understand who the peoples were, in terms of who the Moors were, what we begin to do is just look at the word Moor. Because they will try to tell you a lot of things about the word Moor. They are now even trying, I mean, I've heard them say actually, and in books, I'm talking about books that we give our children, that the peoples of North Africa were dark complexion Caucasian. No, I'm telling you, I saw it this year. I could give you the company's name. I've seen this. And they got it all up in this, and they got maps on it where they break up the people, and they have peoples up in here that they would even dare say that they were Vandals. And historically speaking, the Vandals and the Visigoths came down in here, but they never were in control of North Africa at the time that they're saying, and they're not in control of North Africa now. But you see, again, if we're not writing the books, then we can't say, you know, it's like that Paul Revere's horse. You know, Paul Revere's horse was having a discussion with the other horses in the stable. And Paul Revere's horse said, you know, if I had written that story, I'd have been the hero because I'm the one that carried him through the town in the first place. So Paul Revere is not, but it's according to who writes the story. You know, the horse was the hero in that story, but Paul Revere got the credit. And the same is true in terms of our history. You know, it's all according to who's writing the books, and this is why they are doing so many different things to the history books and what they're doing to Molefi Asante and what they're doing to our brother Dr. Ivan Van Sertima and to all of the others in the attacks, because they understand what the Melanic figure is. And I'm telling you now that if this community, if our community and if our children could get a sense of who they were, our children could do in the classroom what Tiger Woods is going to do on the golf course. Now, putting aside all of the brother's personal feelings and beliefs and all the rest of that, and looking at him as a golfer, you can't get better. Not only can't you get better, but he is going to find new and inventive ways of playing golf that has never been seen before. Just as we did in basketball, just as we did in baseball, just as we do in every sport, just as we're doing what our brother John Singleton is doing in the arts, and what our brother Spike Lee is doing, and our sisters are doing, Terry McMillan and all the others. They're bringing things to another level. I've seen Spike Lee do things to that camera, use it in a way that I've never seen people use it before. And I'm saying that we're going to bring things to everything we touch is the same thing that the Moors did. But you have to understand what the Moors did to understand exactly the role that they played in history. Because some of us have Moorish blood in us. And because we cannot place it right, we do not put it all together again. It was Napoleon himself who commented that Africa begins at the Pyrenees. Now the Pyrenees is the mountain range that is somewhere between Spain and Portugal. Now Napoleon III, on his inspection of that area, said, because, you know, when the show came out, Hunchback of Notre Dame, I kept telling, you know, I really didn't want to take them. I really didn't want to take my family to see it, but I understand pressure, you see, and I bend and I twist, but I wasn't going to let it go. So I kept saying before the movie and even during the movie, I kept saying, I want you to look, and I want you to figure out, why is Esmeralda so dark? That's all I kept saying. Why is Esmeralda so dark? Because I wanted my young ones to go into the movie house understanding that there was something they were looking for. They were looking to find out why Esmeralda was so dark. Why was Esmeralda so mistreated, she and her people, in that area of Europe where they were living, in the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the way in which the people treated these so-called gypsies? You see? Now this is what Malcolm was talking about when he was talking about language. See, language is very important, because to understand who the gypsies were, all you have to do is one very important thing, but if you don't do it, you're going to miss it. But if you do it, it's the whole thing. All you got to do is put an E before gypsies. And then you understand who the gypsies were, and you'll understand why Esmeralda was so dark, because they were the Moors. They were the Egyptians. They were the Moors who had been in Europe, and who, after being chased out, became despised because of what they contributed to the community. That is why you'll notice that the gypsies were always reading palms. They were much into astronomy. They were very much into spirituality. They were much into the structure of the society. Why? Because they brought forward this wisdom and knowledge from Africa into Europe. And one of the first things that the European males wanted to do when they wanted to take over the civilization, the Visigoths and the Vandals, was they had to break the power of the woman. This is why it's important to understand that the concept of burning women at the stake didn't happen in Salem, Massachusetts. In fact, that's why Europeans were kicked out of Europe in the first place, because the people were saying, you know, you can't go around burning your woman just because she had an orgasm. Yeah, I mean, that happens sometimes, you know. If you just happen to last long enough, that can happen. But this is what they were doing. If anything occurred out of the ordinary, they would... Homosexuals, we have the term we call faggot. Now, where did the word faggot come from? Faggot came from the fact that in Europe, when someone was of homosexual or gay preference, what the community did is that they made them go out and collect their own sticks that they would burn them at the stake for. And little sticks, twigs, are called faggots. So as they would send these individuals of homosexual or gay or lesbian background out to collect sticks, instead of just saying collect the faggots, they started calling them the faggots. And that's where the word came from. See, we have to understand language. If you don't understand language, you're going to miss things. Because we are living an illusion here. And that is because we've allowed people to define us. And we've accepted their definition. Part of the reason why we have many people celebrating Mother's Day today is because they have accepted a definition. Why? Because Europeans don't treat their mothers right. Therefore, they got to have a day where they say, okay, we're not going to whip you today, Ma. That's how we're going to celebrate Mother's Day. We're not going to whip you. We as an African people, we have sat at the feet of our mothers all our lives. Look at our music. Today, Kiss Alone has nothing but music that we played dedicated to our mothers. Tell me how many songs they have dedicated to their mothers. Think about it. How many songs Europeans have dedicated to their mothers? They may have some, but they don't have, like, they can't play the whole radio day with them like they can do in Kiss FM. But that is because we are a people who have always understood what honor is. Honor is an everyday thing. And the festivity of what we have, see, we never celebrated individuals, which is Western civilization bound. They celebrate individuals. Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas Day is Christ, and Easter is Christ. We celebrated events, such as harvests, such as days of our ancestors. But we never celebrated people days the way they celebrate this. Why? Because it's all commercial. Making all this money today, like the brother was breaking down. All these flowers, all these other things that they're going to be going out here, trying to convince your mother that you love her so tomorrow you can go out and you're not going to speak to her now for another week or two. See, it's not the way. In fact, most of the time, a lot of African folk, we all live together anyway. So we don't have to travel from another town and to see our mother because mother is with us, or at least somewhere within us. These are the kind of concept that the Moors just did not bring. This is a European concept. And what we've got to begin to do is look at the realities of what we're facing. The origins of the word Moor. Just let me give you some examples of the word Moor. There was a brother, or a gentleman by the name of Richard Hakluyt. He was a traveler in the 1400s who reported that in the old times the people of Africa were called Ethiops or Moors or Morens, which means that the word Moor was used for anybody of dark complexion. Like Ethiop means land of burnt faces. Moors meant black. In Spanish, mora is blackberry. Moreno is dark complexion. Moreno also means sweetheart. Mira, morena. You know, when you say morena in Spanish, sometimes that means sweetheart. Sometimes you say even negrita, that's sweetheart. Why? Because the African woman was the sweetheart of the nation. That is the woman who was held up, just like we hold up the European woman, the blonde, the skinny, all that stuff that we say is the model. In Africa, it was the African woman who was that model of what all perfection was. In French, moricard means dark skin. Morillon means black grape. In Italian, mora means Negro or Moorish female. Mora also means blackberry, which when you go to Spanish, mora means blackberry. And then you have moraiola, M-O-R-A-I-O-L-A, which means a black olive. So you have the derivation of the word Moor, so they can't get out of the concept of what the word meant. The word means black. You cannot put other people's faces up here, you know, and say that they were light complexion Ethiopians. Ethiopian mean black face. So if you say light complexion Ethiopian, you're talking about a light complexion burnt face. But you see, when you're speaking English, English says that you can say what you want to because you control people's minds. So if you say it, it is. Like amen. Amen. We say amen means so be it. Amen does not mean so be it. Amen could never mean so be it in the Latin language. Amen means hidden waters that the Kemites gave to the Christian church, that in Latin, they just said, amen means so be it. So be it is a sentence. If you turn that around, so be it, you say it be so. It being the object or the subject, be is the verb, and so is the adverb. Nowhere in the Latin language do you have the derivation of amen. But you do have it in Kemet. So the language, obviously, I mean, they take words and say, this is what it means, and then it's accepted under those conditions. Every day the Webster's Dictionary is being expanded. Every day is being expanded. It's just adding new words. Oh, that sounds good, put it in there. And people who make these decisions, if they say ain't is good English, ain't becomes good English. Why? They said is, not is. Who said is, so is? They said it. And because they said it, and because they have control over people's minds, it be so. But it don't have to be so. And once you say it's not so, it is not so. And that's power. And that's where we are in need of, is just defining ourselves as a people. We want to look at the early Moors. The early Moors, of course, again, looking at Sheikh Anta Diop's model, we know that if in life originating in this area of the world, Africans moved along the Happy Valley, or the Nile Valley, going north, and they branched over going west. So as they traveled north, certain branches of African folk coming through the Happy Valley also branch off west. This is in Sheikh Anta Diop's work, Black Africa. Just as they traveled north, they also traveled south and created the kingdoms of South Africa. The Monomotapa that would later become Monomotapa and the other civilizations of South Africa. They then would also island hop into Australia and New Zealand. Okay, Zena, I'm sorry to say this, but Zena is not a New Zealand. She's a European. Yeah, and it's very important. New Zealand is an African island. Tasmania is an African island. Australia is an African island. All of these areas are African islands, but when they've been around long enough, they can tell you and make you believe that they've been around a long time. Just like when you look at North Africa, I've seen a program where the woman of light complexion was talking about the builders of the pyramids probably looked like her. I can tell you biologically why they couldn't have looked like her. Because when you dress a certain way, and in all of the friezes that we see people that are lightly dressed. If you are a light complexion and you stand in 110 degrees in the shade, you're going to get skin cancer. So you could not have been looking like that and been out in the sun without anything on. So you can't look like that because you would have died. Simple scientific principle. It had no emotion in this at all. I'm not wishing no harm on you. I'm just saying, let's look at this. Biologically, you cannot last in the sun for thousands of years and build pyramids. You can't do that. You die on top of the pyramid. It can't be done. You know? Say, yeah, exactly. You see, these are principles of science that once we get these down and it becomes grounded, then we sit and we start laughing at them. And if there's one thing Europeans don't like, they don't like to be laughed at. They don't mind you laughing with them as long as they're telling the joke, as long as they're not the joke. But I have to tell you, they are the joke. They're a very sad joke, because by now I'd be embarrassed to keep telling the same stories that they're telling and actually believe it. You know, my mother used to say, you know, you're telling this story so convincingly, I could almost believe you know what you're talking about. This is how I feel about them. They play a good game. But as Dr. Clark informed Mary Lefkowitz on the tape that you've seen, you can only have a debate when there are two opinions. There are not two opinions here. There's only one, and the other is a fear of what that opinion really is. You see? So there's no argument here. But we as an African people have to ground ourselves in this and understand where the argument is and where it is not. My mom used to say, don't sweat the small change. And right now they are small change. Because even if they gave us everything we asked for, are we as a nation ready to do what we have to do in terms of assuming control? We need to understand nation building, and looking at the Moors helps us understand this. And this is why I'm looking at the Moors, and that's why I've gone from the Kemetic origin of the universe to the Dogon philosophy to the Moors. Because there's been a natural transgression in my studies to bring me to this level to be able to talk to you about all of the formation, because I can take you right back to the Kemites utilizing the Moors. So it's important that we see this connection. It's important to understand that these early African people can be broken up into different nations. But all people are one people. Don't lose sight of that. There's only one people on this planet. And because of climate, we differentiate ourselves phenotypically or morphologically. That's what happens to the human family. It's the same thing when you take an animal. You can take an animal in one condition, take him to another condition, and that animal, if it survives in its environment, will mutate itself according to its climate. If we teach this to our children in evolution classes in 6th grade, we have books that teach what's called mutation. Mutation says that if you have a faded plant, that's called an albino plant. If you have a peacock without its colors, that's an albino peacock. If you have a cockroach, a white cockroach, that's an albino cockroach. But see, they stop there. They only deal with animals and plants because they know if they took it to the human level, they would have to make the mutation a European. So they stop in the plants and animals because they understand in continuing the story of organic life that which mutated itself from the human being became the European. And just like all other things, we are not the endangered species, by the way. We are endangered because humans are hunting us. The European is endangered because the sun is hunting them. And it's important to understand that by the year 3000, now I'm being nice because I'm a cosmic being, and I know I'm going to be around in another 1,000 years. I may not look like this, but I'm going to come back in another 1,000 years. So I know I'm here. And as an African being, you will never die. Not only will you never die, but you've been not only here a couple of times, but you've touched other galaxies a couple of times also. And as African people, when we were aware of ourselves and what we were able to do through our melanic state, we knew what galaxies we could tap into. It is my belief, and I'm going to end up with this as we go through this presentation, I believe that there were Africans who dared to go where no others went before. I believe Africans left this planet in ships and have been going through all the galaxies, and I'm going to explain that to you when we break down types of civilizations and how you draw your energy source and how we as an African people, like the brother said, we can get all this information we want to, get all culturally beside ourselves. But if we don't have the power to do something economically, and after you get the economics together, because remember, we had the culture and we had the economics, we got to get the military piece together. You see, because you may have all the money you want, all the culture you want, but if they got the big guns, you know, it's like when you on that boat, you know. And that man on the end is very haughty and proud. He says, I got the lifeboat. But that old dingy man on the end says, I got the gun, give up that boat. You see, it don't make a difference what you have. If someone can take it from you, then you might as well not have it. So as a nation, we have to start thinking of very serious things that make people very nervous. But we have to do it in a way that I'm not going to whisper it anymore. I really don't think there's a need to whisper. And I think that when we whisper, we're telling our children that either we're scared to speak out. Now, I understand there are times we have to speak to our family members alone. I have no problem with that. But I think we're whispering too much. And I think we're giving the children an impression that we're scared. And you know, we were the warriors of the world at one time, until the gun came along. You know, the gun is a coward's instrument, by the way, even though we invented that too. Because the gun says that I can't tangle with you human to human because you'll hurt me. So I need to be able to stand back from you and fire something at you to knock you down before you can get to me, because I'm afraid for my life in your presence. So that then when you take this gun and then you multiply it so that you shoot more than one bullet, that tells me that not only am I afraid of you shooting once, I'm afraid I'm not going to kill you, I want to get you a couple times. So then comes the machine gun. Then comes the formation of being able to stand on one continent and press a button to send a missile over to another continent. Not only do I not want to have to see you when I kill you, I don't want to be on the same continent when I kill you. So all of this war power, all of these guns are their own demise. Because what African folk are going to do is going to find a new way to create war power using what is out here now. But if we don't get into the state of nation building, then we're going to miss the whole point. So we've got to understand who we are and what we have done in situations that we have been. And Moors were pretty much in the same situation except for a few differences that we are in today. There was a group of African folk in this area known as the Garamantes. The Garamantes were the Africans from whence Hannibal came out of. Hannibal was a descendant of the Garamantes. St. Augustine was a descendant of the Garamantes. The Moors were descendants of the Garamantes. The Garamantes basically are African folk having moved out into this area because of climate, developed a culture and a way of living. And these were known as the Garamantes. And this is where, these are the Africans that would later become the Moors, move up into Morocco and Mauritania, and then move up into Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus, as you look at the word Al, if you look at it, basically has the formation of introducing it's almost, from what I can understand, it is like in the Islamic language, it's like a prefix, meaning something, what was going to follow would be spiritual, like al-Islam, al-Kameh. See, there is a spiritual formation using the word al, which of course our word is all. Al-Anda. Anda means to walk in Spanish. Luz. Someone want to help me? Light. So al-Andalus means to walk in the spiritual light. And that's what they named this country, or this that we today call Spain and Portugal, but it was more than just that because it touched in the southern parts of France. So the Garamantes were the North Africans, and they were contemporaries of the Kemites. In other words, when the Kemites had their wonderful civilizations, the Garamantes were also doing things. See, we're caught up in Egypt where we look at the pyramids and we look at, but we don't know that at the same time Egypt was flourishing, so was Sudan and Ethiopia. So was northern parts of Africa, including Western Africa. But you see, Egypt is the doorway to African wisdom by the European. They entered Africa through Europe. That's the only thing they know. So therefore, to them, when they write books, everything deals with Egypt. But as an African people, there were things going on in Africa that's just as dynamic. I'll give you another example in social studies. We teach our children about Native Americans, but what we do is that we take the same route Europeans took. We look at the Native Americans along the East Coast when we start teaching children about Native Americans. We don't teach them about what was going on down here. We teach them Native Americans the East Coast, basically where the 13 colonies were. The reality of it is that to understand the Native American nation, you've got to look at the Mississippi River. Because the Mississippi River to Native Americans was what Happy was to the Africans. You go to a place known as Cahokia, which, when you look at the Mississippi River, it almost becomes like a Y and then it comes down. Cahokia is located in southern Illinois. It is the largest pyramid in the northern hemisphere. There are over 110 pyramids along the Mississippi River. For more information on that, there's a book called, by Jack Weatherford, called Native Roots, Chapter 2. It's called Pyramids Along the Mississippi. There is evidence of Ramses III on the Mississippi River. There's a book called Ramses III, Father of America. Get that book and you'll see. Ramses, 1,500 years before the Christian era. Evidence. There is evidence of Africans in Davenport, Illinois. Evidence of Africans in California. Evidence of Africans in New York State. Thousands of years before the European even came to this area. See, we get the impression, because of what they have introduced, that everything started happening in 1492. There was lively and real trade amongst Africans and Native Americans thousands of years before the European even left the caves 2,000 years BC. There is evidence in Cahokia, Illinois, of trade going on with Native Americans of Brazil. There is evidence in Cahokia of artifacts of Native Americans from Canada. There is evidence of an attempted unification of the Native American world amongst the Siouan world, the Muskegon world, and what is known as the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquoian. There is evidence of the three languages coming together, and Cahokia almost was like Washington, D.C. for Native Americans. That was the center point, and you find it right in the middle. You find evidence of all three languages spoken throughout the American hemisphere of Native American peoples in Cahokia, almost like it's a repository of information. This pyramid I'm talking about is called Monk's Mound. Why? Because Monk's Mound is called because when the Trappist monks came to this area, they sat on the pyramid and took it over. And they started dismantling the stones and all the other things that built the pyramid to build their cities. So now when you go to these areas here, you see what are called mounds. But what you don't know is these mounds were once pyramids prior to Europeans dismantling the stones and the bricks and the mortar to build their homes that you see today. Now this is real live history, and I would challenge anybody to refute it. Anybody. Because this is either here or it's not. It's either real or it's unreal, and if I am wrong, please correct me, because I want the right way. I don't want my way. I want the right way. But just as we study African people through what they experience, we think the only thing happening in this time is what's happening in Egypt. But there's, in Cuba, if you read the book by Dr. Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization, he has a piece on Cuba, Central Africa, flourishing civilizations. In Africa, there are civilizations built on top of civilizations. The pyramids are much older than what they say. Not to mention the Sphinx. And when our children start getting into this wisdom and start bringing out their creative genius, and once the ancestors start tapping into their collective unconscious, they're going to be able to see things that we can't see, just like we're seeing things that those that came before us did not see. Not because anybody's better than the other, it's that every generation makes it better for the next. And so this work that we're doing now is as a roadmap. There is a curriculum here. A science curriculum, a math curriculum, language arts, everything that our children are studying in school today can be brought in and can be done because, first of all, let me step back and tell you, there is no such thing as an African-centered curriculum. Now let me explain to you what I mean by that. When African scholars sat down and wrote all of their treatises on science and math, they did not write it and say this is for African people. When they wrote it for any cosmic mind that was in balance and ready to receive information. When the European came upon this information, they had to put their name on things, and they only put their name on things they understood. Theodosius in the 4th century, Justinian in 529, closed all of the temples of the Greek and African educational centers and burned the books. Not to mention, as we come up into 1492, Bishop Lander will do in America to Native American what Cardinal Cisneros did to the Moorish books in Spain. They destroyed the books. Now, when the emperors destroyed the knowledge of the Kemites and what the Greeks got out of the Kemites in 429 and in 529, they plunged Europe into what they call the Dark Ages. The Moors then brought this knowledge back in, having translated the work of the Egyptians, having translated, the Moors translated the works of the Greeks, not knowing they were translating the works of their own ancestors that the Greeks had misunderstood. Africans such as Ibn Rushd, who is known as Averroes, or Ibn Sina, who is known as Ibn Sin, or Avicenna, they read the works of the Greeks, and there is a piece, it's called Egyptian Sacred Science and Al-Islam. It's one of the books that I recommended on the list that you have that spoke about my coming here, where he takes every one of these writers and authors and thinkers and talks about how they felt about the Greeks. They literally turned inside out. Ibn Sina literally turned inside out the Greek thought to bring it back to the Kemetic level. In other words, what the Greeks got wrong, the Moors corrected to make right again. They studied the work of the Sumerians and the Akkadians, all of the ancient work the Moors sent around the world for the works of the Chinese, everybody, and translated these works. And they were well aware of all of this wisdom and all of this knowledge. And they were able to bring it back. Now, what happened? Africans, remember, at this time also are sharing knowledge with Native Americans, and Native Americans are sharing their wisdom with African people, because this is a two-way street now. See, a lot of Native Americans are getting very offended also, and I can kind of understand, because sometimes we as African people get excited with this wisdom. We do to Native Americans the same thing the Europeans do. Make it seem like Native Americans are just waiting on the coast for some wisdom to come. Native Americans were very much aware of their surroundings. They were very much aware of pharmacology and agriculture. They had their own over 250 different kinds of potatoes in South America. So they were well aware. But they did not have pyramid building technology. They didn't have that. And the evidence of that is that it appeared when we see Africans coming to this part of the world. Nothing is born overnight. You can't build a pyramid overnight. It takes time to study. It takes time to master the math and the science, and then you can build things. So obviously there was a trade going on in terms of wisdom. So now the wisdom of the Moors and the wisdom of the Native American again is burnt by Europeans, who one of the bishops, Cisneros, had a barn fire, and in the middle of the public courtyard in Granada in August of 1492, which is a couple of months before Columbus is on the sea, they burned over 800,000 Moorish transcripts on science, math, and language arts. And what I'm telling us now is this: we are now living in Europe's second dark age. Because of the burning of those books back then, it took 500 years. There are treatises that show that Moors understood that if you take the nucleus, if you split the nucleus of certain elements and then contain those split nuclei in a contained area and then let off the detonation, you would have a mighty event. They never said explosion. It took them 500 years for Einstein to understand that concept, And that is the atom bomb. That is what is known as fission in science. Africans understood this way back then. And this is in their Moorish writings. If you want to see this, Ivan van Sertima's piece, The Golden Age of the Moors, a book to look at, because he has a nice breakdown of different essays that talk about the Moors. This is the kind of information that we need to understand in order to move forward with our young people. So the Garamantes are the early peoples that would later become the Moors. There is also a Kemetic and Dogon connection. It's important to know that the people of North Africa were the neighbors of the Kemites, and that during the occupation of Spain, the Moors from Mauritania displayed with considerable credit the grandeur of the collective African civilization and culture. But along the scene comes these Europeans. Remember, it was the Visigoths, these Germanic peoples coming up out of this area here, blonde hair, blue-eyed people, coming down out of this area here that begin to conquer everything they come upon. In fact, they were the ones that destroyed the Roman Empire. And even the Romans called them barbarians. And if the Romans called them barbarians, well, you know the evidence of the word, because we got a word now called vandal. And you know what a vandal is, and that's what they were. They were vandals. That's where the word comes from. They come down and they destroy, and they come down into other parts. The Ostrogoths go east, the Visigoths go west. So as they come down, the Ostrogoths come this way, the Visigoths come this way, and they end up in the 400s and the 500s, somewhere here in Spain, and they're ruling Spain for a good 200 years. Before in 710, a brother by the name of Tarif, who is one of the administrators, the leaders, the lieutenants, a very important military leader of Tariq's army of Morocco, he goes in 710, July 710. Tarif, an officer in General Tariq's army, goes on a reconnaissance mission. Because now here's something else. Now it's going to come right up into this present time right now. Count Julian and Roderick. Okay? Roderick is the Visigothic king that is ruling Spain. And Count Julian is a prince. He's someone of value. He's someone who has a daughter, who sends his daughter into the court of Roderick to be trained to become a lady. It is said, this is the way the story goes, that Roderick violated Count Julian's daughter. He raped her. And Count Julian got very upset. And this is what started it. Because he whistled over to the Africans here. He said, look, I got something for you now. He called them forward. And that's when Tarif went up to do a reconnaissance. He spoke to Julian to see what he was coming from. To see, why are you giving up all this land here? It all came, the story comes down that it was because of his daughter. Tarif, and by the way, that's where we get the word, the name Tarif. When you have to pay a tariff. Was because where Tarif landed, Europeans had to pay a tariff from that point on in order to make that movement into that part of the land. So the word tariff comes out of Tarif. Okay, the next year, there's a brother by the name of Tariq ibn Ziyad ibn Ab Allah ibn Walgu. Now that's an African right there by how many names he's got. And now you know where the Hispanics get it from. When they had this joke about, my name is Jose Moreno, going to Gonzalez Alvarez. Well, that's where they got it from. Because before that, they were just so-and-so of this, so-and-so of this. But see, when you get this concept of naming yourself after different elements, then you come forward with these concepts. In 711, Tariq with Berbers, who are Africans, by the way, don't let them tell you that Berbers are light complexion people. That's where they get the word from, barbers, barbarians. Romans call Africans barbarians. And that word, that's why it's called the Barbary Coast in that area, because they said along this coast there are barbarians, Berbers. These are African people here. This is even before there were light complexion people here. Tarif goes over and he disembarks near a rocky place. He has 7,000 men, 6,700 are Africans, and 300 are Arab translators. He makes his way into the land. There's a rocky place that was at that time called Gebel Tariq, which today we call Gibraltar. Tar, Gibral, is the contaminated form of Gebel, and Tariq, which is the name of the general. Gebel Tariq became Gibraltar. In August of 711, he won a decisive victory over the Visigothic army. And by the way, if your name is Medina, that's a Moorish name. Your name is Alvarez, anything with Al in it, Alfred, Albert, that's all Moorish, that's all African. Your name is Morris, Maurice, Morristown, anything like that, Gouverneur Morris, all that's African. All of that is African. Whenever you see the word Moor, you're dealing with an African. Lissim Moor, Kalim Moor, whatever more is African. In August of 711, he won a decisive victory over the Visigothic army. It was during this conflict that Roderick, the last Visigothic king, was killed. Basically, there are three Moorish dynasties in Al-Andalus. Basically, you have from 710 to 1086, you have what is known as the Umayyad, that was interrupted by Abbasid. You know those are both African. Wherever you have Ma. Mayyad. Just look at Ma. That's African. This is etymology. This is language. This is where we move away from them trying to give us these illusions and understanding the etymological movement of wisdom. Where you have the sound, you have the African concept of Moor. You have the Abbasid, Abba, Abu, Abba, Abat, coming out of the Ethiopic language. Abba, Baba. It comes out of the African concept. So the first dynasty, basically from 710 to 1086, approximately 376 years, the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasty. From 1086 until 1194, you have the Almoravid, Avid. Don't have to tell you any more about that. They eventually come out as the Morabites, but basically Al-Mor, when you see this, you know you're dealing with an African. From the year 1194 until 1492, Al-Mohade, Al-Mo, again, Hade. Now all of this I have on a curriculum study guide, so if you're a little bit, in terms of my writing, I know I'm just here and there. I like to write in concepts. So approximately from 710 until 1492, you have African ruling Spain, France, parts of Italy, Sicily. See, I've often said that what happened in Bensonhurst and what happened in Howard Beach, that was black on black crime. They don't really like to say things like that, but if you're Sicilian, you black. You black just like if you were Puerto Rican. You black just like if you were from the Caribbean somewhere. And when you look at them, you can see the Africanness in them. And part of what makes them feel towards us, what they feel towards us, is that innate resentment to know that they're African. You know, but the unfortunate thing is they don't know that the very thing that makes them, if they are great is the African blood. See, everybody's trying to be Visigothic. You know, when I come upon people who talk about how they come from Europe, I always like to play that Visigothic Vandal thing on them. You know, what are you, a Visigoth or a Vandal? Because you've got to be one of the two if you're going to claim European blood. Because you standing here just as dark as I am, with hair very curly like mine, you better believe that you're black. Whether you have convinced yourself that you're not or not is a whole other story altogether. So we have these three dynasties in Africa that literally are, they are doing a number of things, and they are developing the nation. In terms of Moorish civilization, when we look at women in Al-Andalus, what we notice in terms of women is that women have total equality. And this is something that's very difficult for some people to understand in terms of the role that women played. We find doctors, we find lawyers, they walked about the streets freely, and one of the problems that the Moorish Muslims had with the other parts of the Islamic world was the role that women played. You see, because again, these Jektonites brought back their barbarity and their off-centered feelings towards women. And that's what is in Islam today. Not in all of Islam, but those parts of Islam that will denigrate a woman clearly are in the throes of the Jektonite, the Visigothic concept of women's inferiority. So women had a very important role in terms of the society itself. The city of Cordoba. In terms of looking at Moorish civilization, we look at the city of Cordoba, and we notice that the Moorish city of Cordoba, which is often regarded as the medieval world's most cosmopolitan and sophisticated city, possessed in the 10th century, the 900s. It has 1,600 mosques, 900 public baths, 213,077 middle-class homes, 60,300 mansions, and 80,455 shops. Wealthier homes consisted of 2 floors, a library in each home, a garden, hot and cold running water, air conditioning in the summer, and heat in the winter. The population of Cordoba was estimated between 500,000 to 1 million residents. The Spanish city of Cordoba in the 10th century was very much like a modern city. Its streets were well paved. Their streets were paved. The sidewalks were raised for the pedestrians. And at night, you could walk for 10 miles by the light of lamps, flanked by uninterrupted extents of buildings. This is Cordoba in the 900s. Europe would not see this for another 400 years. This is just the city of Cordoba alone. Now, there is something that I wanted to do in terms of making a connection between the ostrich in Kemet, the ostrich in Dogon, and the ostrich in the Moorish civilization, because on the shield, on the emblem of the family crest, for instance, a lot of Moors had the ostrich. Now, the ostrich can only be found in Africa. Now, of course, you can find a Great Adventure, but that's today. See, and when children see ostrich in Great Adventure, they think that it could be indigenous to America. See, children don't know the difference. Children don't know the only place you can find an ostrich is like the lion. You can only find a lion in Africa. You will only find an ostrich in Africa. That's the only place that you will find ostriches. So wherever you see an emblem or a symbol of an ostrich, it has to relate back to an African concept no matter what. And these are some of the principles that we have to look at in terms of wisdom and knowledge. The ostrich feather, of course, in the Kemetic legacy was Ma'at. Ma'at representing just, truth, balance, righteousness, and all things that are just and right. The ostrich in the Dogon civilization represented a number of things. For one thing, the ostrich runs in a zigzag pattern. So does the universe. The Sirius B and Sirius A move with each other in a zigzag position. Cosmos in the elliptical form, as they travel through the universe, they travel in a zigzag position. But not just that, if you look at the crown of the Kemites, you'll notice that the white crown is shaped like an egg, which by the way is the ostrich egg. The Hogan of Dogon, the leader, the spiritual and the fundamental leader of the Dogon nation, the Hogan, on his headpiece is also shaped like an egg, and it's an ostrich egg. So there's a relationship in terms of the ostrich and the role that it plays in Kemet, in Dogon, or in Mali, and also in the Moors. So there's a connection here that we cannot look at. In fact, even today, it is a sacred symbol which often has totemic significance among the people in Africa, especially in the Sahel and the Cushitic areas. So you can see that there is a relationship between the ostrich and the peoples of this area here. So when you find an ostrich up here, you know it came from here. The Mozarabs. The Mozarabs are individuals who were Catholics who adopted the social customs of the Moors and Arabs. Those peoples of Spanish background that they just love the Moorish culture. So, like we got some people amongst us like this that love the European culture. You see? And they identify, they speak the language, they dress the dress, they talk the talk. Exactly. Also, I heard a brother from Haiti once say that 95% of Haiti is Roman Catholic. 100% of Haiti is Roudan. You see? So that when the lights go out, even Baby Doc go to priest and priestess. You see? This is what the Mozarabs were. The Mozarabs were people who, while they kept their own Spanish flavor, they adopted the ways of the Moors. They studied the Moorish science and math. They became Moors, but at the same time they remained who they were, so they were Mozarabs. Mo, of course, I don't have to tell you what that is, the Moor, and Arabs. So they were Mozarabs. And as a result, the Mozarabs, like the Jews, were entitled to their own legal system, complete with their own magistrates and own laws. Now, that's another key piece about African folk. You see, we got up in this area here. We didn't tell anybody you had to be a Muslim. We said, be what you are. Whatever you are, if you live the legacy of your spiritual faith, you will be a good person. And whatever makes you who you are, just keep on being that. You don't have to be what I am because you're not me. See, they don't have that concept. You must be them. You must act like them. You must talk like them. And anything that acts out of that is xenophobic in nature. They become fearful of you. Even if you look silly with a blonde wig
and you're wearing all their clothes but your black face, they're more comfortable with that than when the sister has the dreads, or when the sister or the brother has the braids. You see, that is very threatening to them. When you wear African clothes, that's very threatening to them. See, they always have to know where that outfit come from. Well, the same place your outfit came from. You know, I mean, where did your outfit come from, you know? Costume sometimes. Yeah, costume, yeah. You know, when you really look at it, you're the one in the monkey suit, so what are you talking about, you know? Because, you know, ties are phallic symbols. Ties are penises. And the knot are the testicles. And that's why men wear them. And that's why women look so silly when they have them on. Because they're upside down obelisks. Ties are upside down obelisks, and you notice that they all come to a point, just like an obelisk. That's where it came from. That is a remnant of their contaminated concepts of what Africans gave them. Now let's look at adoptionism, because this really is at the heart of probably what split the church in the first place, but what mandated the Moors to bring in this new concept of spirituality, because the Moors, the Islamic faith really was moving away from what the Christians and the Jews had messed up. So many of the Africans in the Saudi Arabian area were trying to tell folk, look, you got Christianity wrong. You got Judaism wrong. Now I'm going to take the best of both of your faith systems and try to show you really what the God concept is. It is called adoptionism, and that's what they did in parts of Al-Andalus, which means that Jesus Christ was an extraordinary and supernatural prophet, but he was 100% human being, whereas the European gave him half man and half God. You see, what that did is it made people worship. Exactly. And it became a cult. Africans did not have a cult. A cult is a faith system. The biggest cult in the world is Christianity, because the center of your faith system is built on an individual as opposed to on a God concept. African folk were always on a God concept. If anything became pagan, it was the Roman Catholic Church, because they were the ones that created the idols. See, the Romans began the concept of idols because they never understood what the natures were in the Kemetic philosophy. They didn't understand pantheism. They didn't understand having one God, and then that one God shows him and herself in everything that exists. See, that's pantheism. One God, and this one God shows itself in everything on earth. For instance, let me give you some examples. In the dog has a very special gift, the gift of smell. That's a God-given gift. He can smell, and that's why he becomes the judge. That's why Impu or Anubis becomes the judge, because dogs can tell right from wrong. Right at that point that something is about to die, they know the difference between a second life and the second it's going to die. Therefore, dogs have a God-given gift of smell. Now, Kemites, Africans, do not worship the dog. They worship the ability to smell, because that's the God-given gift. Africans say, if only I could have that discriminatory power. So when they look at the dog, they respect the gift that God has given the dog. In the bird is eyesight. A falcon can be way up and can see a worm, can be way up and see things way down. Africans say, wow, if I just had that God-given gift, special gift, given by a creative force to a bird, to a falcon, to Tehuti the ibis bird, you see, to the Bennu bird, this gift of sight, the ability to see, the eye of Heru. The cat, the agility. I saw a cat fall out 9 stories, hit the ground, dash off. That ability, because as it fell, it measured its fall and measured its gravity, and by the time it hit the ground, it bounced up and was able to move. The agility of a cat. That's a God-given gift. Didn't worship the cat, worship the agility of the cat, hoping that maybe it could rub off on me. You see. Let's look at the ostrich. I'm sorry, not the ostrich, the owl. The owl has the ability to see in the dark. It's not the smartest bird in the world, by the way, but it has a gift. And that God-given gift is the ability to see in the dark. And Africans said, wow, seeing light is like having knowledge. In the dark is where ignorance is. So the owl has the ability to see light in the dark. In other words, it can see intelligence in darkness. It can pull the sense out the nonsense. But not just that, the owl also has the unique ability to turn its head 360 degrees. So not only can it see light in the dark, but it can see all angles of everything. So Africans said, wow, if I could have that gift. I don't worship the owl. But I worship the gift that God has given the owl, hoping that if I can be one with owl, I can have the gift that owl has. So African folk always work towards attempting to look at nature as a pantheistic, that everything in nature has God in it, and that if we can tie our God into their God, then we become one with nature, and that formation of balance becomes Ma'at. Very simple. People in the community. Nothing difficult. The greatest teachers in the world have been those that took complex issues and made them simple. Whenever you sit before a professor and things are getting more difficult, get out that class. Because he is trying to impress you with how much he really does not know. Because if he made it simple, you would know what he knows. And you would be like God. Because that's the whole thing in that thing going on in the Garden of Eden. You see, they knew that if you touch of some things, you'll be like me. Just like the master on plantation said, if you read book, you'll be like me. Therefore, it is forbidden. These are the concepts as we begin to develop ourselves in our classrooms, and we see it's very simple. I always tell anyone I speak with, if I'm making it difficult for you, I am not doing my job. My job is when I can speak to those who have not gone to what we call school and can understand my word. That's what made Christ who he was. The ability to take the parable. And if you're talking to fishermen, you talk in fisherman language. If you're talking to undertakers, you talk in undertaker language. Whatever language, whoever you're speaking to, you transform yourself into that language. And then you get to be understood. Because this wisdom amongst African folk, while amongst many, when we look at it, we have like almost an elite class in Egypt, an elite class amongst the Dogon elite class. But the reality is that those who became the elite became elite by studying what the masses of the people did. See, they just didn't do what they did on their own. They studied the masses of the people, and the masses of the people lived this wisdom. So that when you talk about math and you talk about science, all you got to do is go to a farmer. And a farmer on a farm doing his crop is putting into the same evidence that a master teacher would in an academic area. In other words, it's simple thoughts. It's not difficult. This is not difficult. But it is difficult because they know that once we get a hold of this wisdom and we get to know this stuff, we're going to take it to a level where they can't go. See, the sparrow doesn't fly with the falcon because it doesn't have the expanse of the wing. It doesn't have the power or the breath of life to fly so high. And they know. You see, golf is over for them. It's over. Basketball is over. That's what that man meant when he was talking about boy, chicken, and collard greens. Just those three words alone, I know what he was talking about. Golf is over. Okay, we got golf now. I never was interested in golf. But if I know he's playing, I might tune in a couple of moments. Of course, when he's not playing, I turn it off. But just turning it on for those moments, he has opened another world for our children. How many more of our children now are into tennis because of Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe? How many of our children are now into gymnastics because of all of the African and African-American gymnasts? You see. So this is what's happening all around. They see this coming. But more importantly than that is that the reason why Tiger Woods is great, the reason why Michael Jordan is great, the reason why Spike Lee is great is because these are the only areas where we have truly been allowed to fully use our melanic power. Once we take this melanic philosophy and we bring it into the classroom, we're going to take math to an area that has never been before. They will not be able to create tests for our children because they will not know what our children know. Just like they cannot play basketball with us anymore. They cannot play sports with us anymore. And the only sport that they have, and brothers and sisters are telling them they can keep, is hockey. Brothers say, wherever I am, it must be warm. I am not putting myself on no ice, so I'll take all the sports and y'all can keep hockey. Because that ice stuff ain't working for me. But even when we get on the ice, we can melt it. They have a couple brothers. But let me tell you something. There is nothing that we touch that we don't make good. Even when they give us garbage through the alchemic perspective, taking the lower passions to the higher passions. They gave us the internals of the pig because it was garbage. They gave us the bitterest part of the greens because it was garbage. They gave us pig head, pig ears, pig nose, pig feet. Garbage. And now the Japanese can't come to America without going to Sylvia's on Sunday. We have taken their garbage and made it a delicacy. Whatever we touch, why? Because we know what to do with the hands. See, we've been on the earth for 3.5 million years more than they. And so we know what is on this earth, and we know how to take the worst and make it the best. That's what we are good at doing. And I want to say this, and I want to be careful when I say this, and I want to measure my words, but when we talk about superiority and inferiority, there's something that we always have to understand. If you hold the people down, and in spite of and despite of holding those people down, they still rise, you have automatically made a superior race of people. So while on one end I don't want to say we're superior, on the other end I know we are. And not because we are naturally this way. It is because when I was growing up, my mother said, if your teacher gives you 10 math problems, you do 20. If she gives you 2 books to read, you read 3. Because, Skip, in this world, a black man and a black woman, to be equal, you must be superior. Whatever we are, whatever you may do in your job, believe me, you are better than your counterparts. Not by the nature of your Africanness, but because by the nature of your Africanness, they've thrown everything in your way to stop you, despite that you've risen. So you are good at what you do, not just what you do, but the road it took to get you there. You have mastered. So you are superior. And that's a frightening concept to walk out and tell people that, and you still got to beg for a building. Because despite where you may be, you're still in a very treacherous position in terms of what you can actually achieve and accomplish. So adoptionism said that Jesus the Christ was an extraordinary supernatural prophet, and that Jesus Christ was a mortal prophet appointed to and anointed for his divine mission in the universe, and that was to restore the cosmic balance. And that is what Africans taught. Many Africans taught in many different reasons. Not all, but many. And it was called a Christic revelation, because look at the Egyptian word. Even when you look at the word itself, when you look at the concept, and you see, again, I go back to words. Because what you call into being, remember, Atum was word. Amma is word, so words are very important. And you know, even when you look at Ka, which means spirit, and then in the Egyptian language, Res means to rise. You have spirit to rise, and that's what Christ was, resurrection. So Ka-Res became Karishna, which became Christ. Karast. This Christ is a Kemetic word. That's why the language is spoken in Africa, the Geese. All of these concepts come directly out of the African mind. And so these kinds of ideas going into Moorish Spain or Al-Andalus brought a lot of unexpected rebellion against the European Christians, because actually the people, they never believed it in any way. They didn't believe in Christianity. They just went along because the Visigoths were very treacherous. I mean, what they did, and you know, we have to understand the Crusades and the role that the Crusades played in all this. Because, you know, when some of the Crusaders would go into a town, you know, sometimes when you have 1,000 Crusaders coming into a town of a couple of thousand, the town is not prepared to feed the people that's coming in, the Crusaders, as they trekked across Europe going into, trying to get into Jerusalem. So when they weren't able to feed the people, they would go in and take the infants and put them on pits and cook them up, put a little barbecue sauce on them, and eat them. I'm not playing. That's what they did. That is their record. That's their record. They ate many children on their way. And according to how high-ranking you were as a Crusader, was how much of the rump you got of the infant, because there was more meat on an infant's butt. I'm telling you the truth. This is their own recordings. This is their own people. There is a 4-part series on the Crusades. It's called The Crusades by Terry Jones. This come out of BBC. This is not even something I'm saying. BBC recorded this. I encourage you to get that 4-part series to see exactly what the Crusades were about, because it was what the Moors brought into Europe that got all of Europe a buzz as to how they could get it. And the number one thing they were hooked on was sugar. That's what they were looking at, and that's what the Moors introduced into Al-Andalus that got them. Sugar back then was what cocaine is today. And it took just about that much of sugar then to get them high. And they say Europeans would spend big money on a spoonful of sugar. The Crusaders It's with Terry Jones, and it's done by BBC, but it was put on television by A&E. I think that's Arts and Entertainment. Okay, well, we ordered the tape on that, and I've been looking at that, and some of the things, like, for instance, let me tell you something else about Richard the Lionheart. You know Richard Lionheart, you know that individual in Sherwood Forest that Robin Hood comes across, and they all bow down, and they worship this man, so-called Richard the Lionheart. Well, Richard Lionheart was King of England. Unfortunately, he was a Frenchman. His name was not Richard Lionheart. His name was Richard Coeur de Lion. He didn't speak a word of English. He was the King of England. But let's take that one step forward, because the King of France at the time, who was on the crusade with him, he and Richard the Lionhearted were lovers. And the reason why he is returning back into, the reason why Richard the Lionhearted is being found by Robin Hood is because Richard the Lionhearted is returning back to England because his lover, the King of France, returned back from the Crusades early, and Richard the Lionhearted was afraid that the King of France was going to try to usurp the throne of England. So he was coming back to England, leaving everybody to die in the Crusades because he was afraid his lover was going to take over his kingdom. This is their history. We're going to touch on Moorish agriculture because it's important to know what the Moors brought in terms of food stuff. I go to Jamaica today, we're going to get some French fries. I get what they call Irish potato. But nobody said it was the Spaniards that brought the white potato into Europe, and because the land could not support the potato growth, there was a famine because it don't grow. You would think that the potato is indigenous to Ireland. It is not. The reason why there was a famine was because the potato can only grow in the kind of climate in South America. When you bring it to England, particularly Ireland, it's not going to grow there. It doesn't have what is needed. So it's not going to grow. So they had a famine. But when you go to Jamaica, you have to ask for an Irish potato. Chances are that potato probably originated in the backyard of where a person was going to cook it up. So they go and call it an Irish potato, but it's from Central and South America. Over 250 different kinds of potatoes. Blue potato, green potato, sweet potato, bitter potato, white potato, red potato, orange potato. 250 different kinds of potatoes. Yet we think it comes out of Europe. It comes directly out of South America. And that's what Native Americans taught the Europeans. Now into Europe came the advances of an empire more immense than those of either Alexander the Great or Rome at its height. Rice was introduced into Europe by the Moors in the 10th century. Cotton was by the 9th. You see, we got ourselves in trouble again. See, I've never known about cotton had we not introduced it to them in the first place. You see? Now that's why we're here today. A Moorish botanist by the name of Ibn Basal partitioned the land into 10 different classes, according to particular characteristics, and taught the farmers ways of increasing the fertility of their plots. Surveys were done to locate sweet water below the earth, and widespread use was made of the water wheel which the Moors had introduced into Spain. The Moors dug canals and channels to irrigate the farmlands and provide water for the thousands of houses and mosques and palaces and public baths. They not only increased the fertility of the soil with their new methods and tools, plants and manures, but they also ushered in sciences of food preservation and storage. They could store wheat for as long as 100 years. Their methods of drying enabled such foods as figs, plums, cherries, and apples to remain edible for several years. And you see, the other thing is that the way in which African folk did it was by sun-dried. You see, the difference between sun-dried and the other kind is that when you dry something unnaturally, you take the life out of it. Okay? When you dry it with the sun, while the sun is capturing the water, it is giving it something known as photovoltaics, which is electricity. So when something is sun-dried, which is in a natural sense, while it may be taking out the liquid part, it is also reviving it with the energy of the sun, which when you ingest it, it has the power of the sun in it. So sun-dried. That's why sea salt is more important than the other kind of salt, because white salt, regular, has been bleached out. Sea salt has been sun-dried. Therefore, it is very much like the salt that is in the human body, because it is the evidence of the vitamin D coming out of the sun. So there's a direct relationship between that. Moorish education. The Moorish educational foundations found itself in Greek and the intellectual world of the Kemites, along with all of the others, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, the Kemites, all of the different ancient cultures, was the Moors built this new civilization on. And a Cordoban by the name of Ibn Hayim describes a Moorish educational system as such. They studied the Holy Quran, but not just studied the Holy Quran, but they evaluated the Quran. They talked about the Quran. They did addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, plane geometry, in that order. You see, we've got to teach in order. In other words, in high school, we teach our children pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, and trigonometry. Why? Because that's the way those mathematical formulations occur. You do not teach trigonometry before you teach algebra. It's algebra, geometry, trigonometry. The same is true in this sense. You have addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, plane geometry, in that order. Now we've got to go back into our classrooms and look at this, because we're teaching out of sequence. One formulates on the other. They taught arithmetic, which is the manipulation of numbers. They taught Euclid's celestial bodies, which is astromathematics. They taught Ptolemy's almagest, which is the study of finity and infinity. They taught logic and polarity, which we call today rhetoric, which is what they do, rhetoric. They taught botany, zoology, geology, medicine, in that order. Botany, zoology, geology, medicine. Now look at this in terms of evolution. The first organic life on earth were plants. Out of plants came the zoology, or the animal life. Within that concept came the geology that would support that life, and then came medicine, which repairs that life. So in teaching it in those segments, it built one on the other, as opposed to teaching geology this way and teaching medicine this way. There's another key to all of this. And as we begin to develop our consciousness, as we begin to look at this, we're going to develop, as the brother was saying, in terms of developing schools. This is what we need to develop our schools on patterns of order, teaching in order so that one leads to another. You count from 1 to 5, but you try to get to 5 without counting 2. You can't get to 5 without going through 2. It can't be done. Otherwise, you stop right at 1. They taught history, emphasizing causes for ascension and decline in ancient society with the intention of avoiding repeated errors, and they taught religious law, which they called Sharia. Now, look at this. Translation from Arabic, the medieval language of science, in the 10th century centers. The translator centers sprung up all over Christian Europe. Barcelona, Tarazona, Leon, Segovia, Pamplona, Toulouse in French, Béziers, Narbonne, and Marseille in France. Bologna, whatever they say it, Salerno, and Paris made extensive use of Moorish scientific treatises. The translations from the Arabic provided links between Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, and England. Alfonso X promoted Moorish wisdom at every opportunity. The first university of Christian Spain was founded at Valencia by Alfonso VIII in the 13th century, and the teachers employed were Muslims and Jews. Now let's look at some European centers of learning where the teachers of these centers sat at the feet of Africans. Let me take it to you by year. In 1158 in Italy, the University of Bologna. In 1180 in France, the University of Montpellier. In 1200 in England, Oxford University. Now check it out. You look at Oxford today, got all this thing about, what is that, the Rhodes Scholar, big place. Oxford University was founded by Jews who sat at the feet of Moors and went to England and formed Oxford University. In 1209, the University of Valencia in Spain. In 1223, the University of Toulouse in France. In 1224, the University of Naples in Italy. In 1228, the University of Padua in Italy. You know, by the way, Our Lady of Fatima, you know that Fatima? That is a Moorish shrine dedicated to a Moorish woman by the name of Fatima, that they go and they beg down on their knees for intercession and help. What they don't tell you is that who they are praying to is an African woman. The shrine of Our Lady of Fatima. Fatima is a Moorish word in itself. In 1245, the University of Rome in Italy. In 1250, the University of Salamanca in Spain. In 1257, Cambridge University in England. In 1279, Coimbra in Spain, Portugal. And in 1290, the University of Lisbon in Spain, Portugal. These are universities founded where the teachers, the original teachers that studied, sat at the feet of Moors like the Greeks did with the Kemites, sat at the feet of these Africans, learned information, and returned back to their country and started these universities. Now, before I keep going at 7:29, I just want to make sure in terms of time. How are we in terms of time? Okay.
86.
Sure.
Part 2.
Okay. 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 So how much time? Okay. Let me tell you something about, let me first tell you something about the end of Moorish rule. By 1492, the Moors had lost all of Spain except the Kingdom of Granada. The Christians, although not free from internal disputes, were finally united by the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, which joined in peace the formerly hostile royal houses of Aragon and Castile. The united Christian forces surrounded the city of Granada and blockaded it for 8 months. The Moorish king Abu Abdallah, known as Boabdil, finally surrendered. The Moors lingered in Spain for a little more than a century. By 1610, through expulsion and migration, 1 million, among them many Jews, had returned to North Africa and Western Europe. This expulsion set back modern civilizations. Now, the edicts of Theodosius in the 4th century, let's step back. The edicts of Theodosius in the 4th century closed down the temples of the Egyptian mysteries, as well as the philosophical schools of Greece. The Emperor Justinian in 529 ACE followed in the same path as Theodosius. Thus an intellectual darkness descended over Christian Europe and the entire Greco-Roman world. It lasted for centuries until the Moors came in 710. Cardinal Jimenez de Cisneros started massive burnings of African and Arab books. It inspired a similar bonfire of Native American books by Bishop de Landa in the Yucatan. Catholic Spain compelled Spaniards to destroy many Moorish manuscripts that the conquistadors acquired after the fall of Granada in 1492. According to Pascual Gazangos, Cardinal Jimenez de Cisneros ordered the burning of nearly 800,000 books in a public square of Granada. The cardinal is said to have asserted that since the books were all in Arab, they were Korans and therefore dangerous. Now, what I want to do is this. I would like to bring things together for us to understand just a couple of principles that I think are very important. And my brother, would we be able to play any of that music? In terms, because I just want to let you know that. Okay. I thought that the brother said that you could. Basically, okay. What I did was this. I brought a tape. In fact, I brought a tape with 2 different albums on it. One was Miles Davis. It was called Sketches of Spain. Another piece I did was John Coltrane did an album he called Olé. In both of these albums, John Coltrane is very important. In Philadelphia, he was very impacted by the Islamic community, the Nation of Islam, but also Moorish Americans. And in particular, a group coming from Pakistan carrying the Moorish tradition known as Ahmadiyya. Ameddiyya. In Philadelphia, had a strong impact. These were Moorish Americans, okay? These were Pakistanis with the Moorish influence, but also the followers and the believers of the Honorable Noble Drew Ali also were in Philadelphia. So out of the influences that Islam and the Moors had on John Coltrane then took that consciousness and did an album called Olé. I brought a copy of it to play while I present it to you, but in its absence, I encourage you to go and see if you can find this, and you will hear jazz, and then the Moorish impact it has on jazz, and then see the African-American experience as it is with jazz. Now, Miles Davis, he heard a song done by a man by the name of Joaquin Rodrigo, who did, the Spanish bullfight song. It's called Concierto de Aranjuez. And he was in L.A. in 1959, and he was introduced to this song by a Native American from Mexico, who told him, Miles, check this out, man. You can do this. And he said that he started playing this song, Concierto de Aranjuez, for Miles Davis, and Miles said that this song just stayed in his mind and stayed on his mind until he got back. He called Gil Evans, who was one of his arrangers. And he and Gil sat up and he did this album, Sketches of Spain. And this is what he says. The Black Moors, this is what Miles Davis is talking to Quincy Jones in his autobiography. The Black Moors were over there in Spain because Africans had conquered Spain a long time ago. In the Andalusia area, you have a lot of African influences in the music, architecture, and a lot of African blood in the people. So you had a black African thing up in the feeling of the music, in the bagpipes, in the trumpets, and in the drums. So Miles was aware. And so he brought this consciousness to his music, and this is why Miles is so great, was because he was able to take a consciousness with his weak points. Let's put them aside for a while. Let's view the brother's music. He knew his consciousness, and he knew how to adapt the Moorish influence. So I wanted you to be able to hear the Moorish influence that was on Miles Davis at the time that he did Sketches in Spain in 1959. But, and again, I have all of this in the back along with a few other pieces, but what I'd like to do is tell you about some of the things that I've brought. I'd like to introduce to you that's going to connect all of these pieces together, because I think we have to connect this so that we can begin to see where the connection is. And then what I'd like to do also is I'd like to show you something that will demonstrate this connection. When I first came to you and I began to develop ideas in terms of developing information, what I did was that I presented ideas in terms of the Kemetic origin of the universe. And in giving you the Kemetic origin of the universe, what I showed you was how Africa had united the whole world in this Kemetic thought. Let me show you what I mean. If I were teaching a curriculum, and the material is back there to support this, if I were to teach a curriculum, I would begin with teaching the Kemetic origin of the universe, which in and of itself has a connection. It has a connection in a number of different ways in terms of the overall program. Okay. Now, in the back, I have a photograph of the Shibata Stone. The Shibata Stone should be in every one of our homes, because the Shibata Stone is a primary source that goes back many years. It is important for, when people say to you, well, where are you getting this information from? You can show them where you're getting it from the Shibata Stone. I also have a translation of the Shibata Stone that will show you what it meant in terms of the development of astrophysics amongst the Kemites. What we do is we look at two other philosophies in this Kemetic origin, but then we take it down to the first one is the primate of the essences, the second one is the essences of pre-existing order and arrangement, and then the third one is the essences of order and arrangement. Now, from the Kemetic origin of the universe, I would then take you to the African origins of solar history, which then tap into the Dogon knowledge. And the Dogon knowledge talks about Numo and Ama, which is a further branch of the already steps in terms of education. If I can just have this as a title. Don't have to say African education, don't have to say Kemetic education, just have to say education. The Dogon introduced a number of very interesting things, but something that I think is very important to us as a people, to break this knowledge down into teaching levels. And by that I mean this. The Dogon taught in levels. First you have Jiriso or Giriso, which is the word in the front. This is what we teach our children in early childhood and elementary. Early childhood would be from pre-K to approximately the 5th. Even if you want to go into junior high school, you can go from pre-K until 8th grade, if you so choose. This is the word in the front. Don't get too heavy with them, but you give them enough so that they understand. The next step after this becomes Beniso. Beniso is the word on the sides, which gets a little bit deeper than Jiriso, but still is building on to already prior knowledge. Now here's where we have our problem in our school, and this is what's happening in Newark. Okay? If the child has not mastered Jiriso, you cannot go on to Beniso. It is impossible to ask a child, you're in high school, how come you cannot read? It's impossible. You haven't mastered Jiriso. How can you get to high school? In Africa, that wouldn't have happened. You would have to master Jiriso in order to go to Beniso. And between Jiriso and Beniso, you would have a rites of passage. We call it graduation today. Africans call it rites of passage. You cannot go to Beniso if you've not mastered Jiriso. You can't do it. Just like you can't read the Odyssey if you don't know how to read. How are you going to read in high school? How are you going to read the books in high school if if you can't read? Okay? Now, after you've mastered Benny, and this might be your high school through college. It could be from the 9th grade. Maybe you want to go to, let's say, the 16th grade, which is the end of college. Then after Benny So, you have Bolo So. Bolo So is a word from the back. You see, here's the concept. The word in the front is here. The word on the side, you see, when you look at something, you look at it like this way, and then you look this way. Okay? The Africans are taking you through a simple walk. You see what you see in the front. That's the front word. Then after you get the front down, you look to either side to see what's there. So you have the word on the side. Then after you get the word on the side, you turn around and you look at the word in the back. Okay? So that becomes Bolo So. Very simple, very straightforward. In fact, most of us do that. As you walk on the street, you see what's in front. If you hear a noise, the first thing you do is you look to the side. If you look at the front, nothing's up. Look at the side, nothing up. You look in the back. Very simple, straightforward. Nothing hard about this. But unfortunately, we're telling our children to look in the back when they don't know what's in front. So then they fall into a pit. If they know what's in front, they must then look to the sides. After they get to the front and the side, then they look to the back. Okay? Now that could be anywhere from, I would say, going up to the PhD. And then you have D, which is Sodai, which is the word from the inside. So after you get the word in the front, the word on the side, the word in the back, then you are conscious enough to look inside, and that's why they have the concept of know thyself. Then you look inside, and then you find that word out. This is the way in which we would break down knowledge for our young people in terms of the development. However, now, this would be part 2, if I may erase this, because I have this written down all for you in case you're interested. The third part comes when you talk about the African views of earth science. And that's where the Moors come in. You teach the civilization of the Moors, you pick up where you left off with the Kemites and the Dogon, and you bring it all together, because as Dr. Clark teaches us, you cannot get caught up in Egypt. And too many of us are caught up in Egypt because they're caught up in Egypt. All of Africa was great. There was dynamic civilizations in all parts of Africa. Not in every part of Africa, but I'm saying north, south, central, east, and west had dynamic civilization. And you had periphery nations that had not developed themselves to the level of some. That's true, but you got that in Appalachia today. So if you want to just take an isolated part of a community and say, this is what Africans are, yeah, you could go to Appalachia and take out a particular segment of them and say, this is what Americans are. See, they like to do that with us. They like to take the very worst of us and say, this is what they are. There's good and bad in everything. But they tend to want to just make us look like this is exactly what we are. Okay, now, let me stop because I know time is moving. And let me just do something because I think this is important in terms of developing an idea. I've done this with you many times before. George G.M. James calls this the law of polarity or the law of opposites. That everything that exists in our world comes about through opposing forces, and that's true. We, all of us in this room right now, are an example of opposites coming together and creating us. It's the original concept of the Trinity. Each and every one of us is an end result of our mother and father joining in one and bringing us forward. We are not our mother, we are not our father, we are a divine balance of both mother and father. And our brothers and sisters are both the same kind of dynamic balance of the same. And everything in the universe comes together. This is why I'm frightened to think that some of us might think that God is a man only. That's very frightening to me. Very frightening to me. It is very frightening for me to see women accept that thought. It's very frightening to me how we could actually think that God is a man only. It's absolutely frightening. And this is something that we're going to have to overcome. I know some of us are frightened to think in terms of God being a woman, but God is a woman too. In fact, the original concept of creation is that divine balance of both male and female. That is why there's only but one God, because there's only one essence that can be both male and female. No matter what Eddie Murphy says, there's but one concept of male and female, and that's God. And if you mess with something other than that, you're going to get caught. Okay. I don't mean to bust on my brother like that. But hey, look, you walk the earth like the whole world is watching you. When you get in a position like that, you better believe all eyes are on you. That brother was set up on the highway, just like Ennis Cosby was. He was too. And if we as an African folk don't walk this earth understanding that people, I act like people, every time I speak on the phone, I talk. When Brother Nooney speaks to me, it's almost as if someone has cut into our conversation. I would not say anything to this brother that I would not want someone else to hear. Because I assume that my phone is tapped. I assume that when I walk down the street there are people watching me. There may not be anybody watching me. But in case, you see, whatever I got to do, I hope I'm smart enough not to get caught. See, the brother should have stayed off that block at 4:45. When you don't, you get yourself in trouble. But see, that's what happens when you go out there to Hollyweird. When you associate with them people. When you associate with them people, that's what will happen to you. I don't think he was like that when he was hanging in Jersey. I don't think he was like that. That's what happens to you when you associate. When you are sane and you associate with insanity, you become insane. You're not going to make insanity sane. That's what my mother always said. Never argue with somebody who is insane. Because either you're not going to make them sane, the only thing is you'll go insane. Or you'll walk away without even, so you wasted your time. You see? But this is what happens, you know, when we get ourselves centered in those kinds of situations. Okay. Africans said that they could put everything they needed to do on the universe, everything that had to do with the cosmos could be put on here. It's the law of polarity. The Dogon called this diagram, and they drew this diagram in the ground. They called this diagram Bonu to the Dogon. I have some material on the Dogon also, in case you're interested, because I cannot tell you everything. You can see where I'm heading with this. I can't tell you all I want to tell you. And if I showed you how much I really would like to tell you, it would be difficult. So what I attempt to do is I try to give you a general understanding, but have background material that you can have at your leisure to be able to expand the base of knowledge. So when I say the Kemetic, the Kemetic origin of the universe, you might have never heard that term before. But I have videotapes and outlines back there that will expand it for you, so that I don't have to get too deep into it here. The law of polarity says that you can take all of the elements on the earth. Now, help me out with the elements. What are the four elements?
Air, fire.
Okay, fire. Air. Water. Water. Earth. Good. Earth. Okay, but now Kemite said, now we can take this another level because every element has a characteristic. What can both fire and air be? It's on the order of what makes steam. It's hot. Good. Okay, now with children now, I could do this in kindergarten. If you know this is hot, what do you know water and earth can be? That's right. Now, what can both air and water be? Moist, or give me a W word. Wet. Good. Now, if you know that air and water is wet, what do you know fire and earth is? Dry. Ken might say, but you can take this a step further because we can put all of the colors on here. Let's go through some of the primary colors. What would red be?
Red.
Red. Good. What would air be?
Red. Blue. No.
Primary color. Oh, primary. White doesn't exist. Yellow. How about water? Good. Earth. Interesting.
Wow.
Let me give it to you because you might not get it. Indigo. Blue-black. It's like a blue-black. In fact, it's called India blue. It's called Indian black. Indigo. Because it's that blue-black. And the reason why they call it Indian black is because that was the complexion of the people that they saw. They were blue-black. And if you go to parts of India, you see people blue-black. I mean, they're dark, very dark complexion. On a hue that moves beyond the brown. Deep into the blue. Deep into this blue-black complexion. Well, of course, you know, because blood is blue. You know, the reason why it turns red is because oxygen hits it. But blood in your vein, that's why your veins look the way they look. They look blue or green because that's the color of your actual blood. But once oxygen hits that blood, it makes it red. The moment oxygen hits, and so when you cut yourself, oxygen hits it, it turns red. But as it's moving through your veins into the light, it's blue. Okay, now, let's look at the secondary colors. When you blend red and yellow, you get orange. When you blend yellow and blue, you get green. When you blend blue and indigo, you get, for the second time, indigo. Very interesting. There are two indigos on the rainbow. When you mix red and indigo, you get a V word for purple. Violet. And then you move in to another concept, which is sound. Because after you get your colors going, when you vibrate at a certain level, you now start getting sound. So let's put the musical. Africans say you can put music on here. You can start here with do. And back to do. Not the same do you started with, but the same do in complement of what you started with. It's almost, but you're up. You know, you moved, by moving through this process, you move yourself up another octave. And then you do it again and again and again and again, and pretty soon the cycle. Africans were well aware of this. So don't believe them when they say that Africans are the pentatonic and Europeans are the diatonic. Africans are both diatonic and pentatonic. Well, they said that there's a certain rhythm. The pentatonic is really what jazz is about. And that this is more like a do, re, mi. Diatonic is more of a scale that deals with the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Whereas the pentatonic scale has a different beat. And jazz is a representation of that ability. It takes it off another scale. That's pentatonic. Okay? Now, everybody got this? Okay, let me just tell you one other thing before we move on. They say you can put every atom on here. You can put every atom. Let's go through the atoms. The four basic atoms of our Earth are atoms. A-T-O-M-S. Atoms. Okay? You have hydrogen. Where would hydrogen go? Help me. Hydrogen goes there. Air. Good. Earth. Good. Fire. It's the one that's the fire in us. It's what creates organic life. Carbon. Now, before I erase this, I want to tell you something. Everything that you need to know about the cosmos is right on the board right now. There's not another thing you need to know. If our children understood these essences, they would understand everything about the universe. I'm not saying everything is there. I'm saying the basic. What is when you bring it down to the lowest common denominator, life is right on this board right now. This can be taught in kindergarten. Melanin comes out of the concept of carbon. When you bring the carbon atoms together. Hydrogen, 4 hydrogen equals 1 helium. 2 helium. When you fuse 2 helium atoms together, you get 1 carbon. When you fuse 4 helium, which is 2 carbon, which is 8 hydrogen, you get oxygen. And it becomes that through thermonuclear reaction constantly. As you double your concepts of hydrogen and helium, you then create all of the other elements that become 109 elements, so-called. There's many more. There's many more that the European has no concept about, and that Africans up in the Ambas of Ethiopia are well aware of, but they're not talking about it because the ears aren't friendly nowadays. When the time gets right, there's a lot of this information that we think is forgotten and hidden that's going to come back amongst us. It's already amongst us now, and people are letting it out little by little. But only someone who doesn't understand the times they're living in is going to stand on 125th Street and talk about all that they know. Because all ears aren't ready for this yet. We still got a lot of more fundamental things to do in terms of our community. The people who stand out and talk about, there are truths. We are not alone in this. And for any of us to think there is not life off this planet, we're in very serious trouble. And I'm telling you, for us not to think it's going to come back, we're in double trouble. And for us not to realize it's going to look like Yaphet Kotto and Esther Roll, we're in double trouble. Because if life does come back on this planet, believe me, it's going to be a black planet. Believe that. And believe the people who are going to come back may not look exactly like us, but they are going to have to be of a dark hue. Because life comes out of the dark. And all you have to do is look at the cosmos, and you see the cosmos is black. And the identification of life in the cosmos is all that comes out of black. Human beings range from light black to dark black. Europeans being light black and Africans being dark black. That's what life is about. And if we don't hook into this concept, people are going to be in very serious trouble. Okay, now, remember this concept, because I want to show you something. And I have material that can substantiate this in the back. Everything I'm talking about, I can tell. Just talk to Candace. Candace will help you out. You know, I named my daughter Candace after the queens of Ethiopia, who chased the Romans out of Ethiopia. I named her that so she would do the same.
Good girl.
Yes,
please.
and it's going to happen. Okay, Ziriab. Ziriab was a brother, brilliant brother. He brought a lot of different knowledge to Africa, from Africa to Europe. He was born in Mesopotamia and got into Al-Andalus in 822. Now, there is something known as a lute. A lute is an instrument very much like a guitar. The lute has 4 strings. Now, I want you to remember that model, because I want to show you something. The lute had 4 strings. Now, the first string they called the zare. Zare. The zare was a treble string. In it being a treble string, the color of it was yellow. And it represented the liquid in the human body called bile. The second string of the lute that Africans brought to Spain was called musana. Musana was 2 times the size of the first string. It was red in color, and it represented blood. Blood. Remember, liquids in the body. Now you can get to understand how heavy these Africans were, because there's something they're doing with this, and it's something that you're going to see that's going to formulate itself, and you're going to understand the importance of music. Exactly. Watch and see what they're going to do. Now this is absolutely brilliant. You know, a year and a half ago when I didn't even realize how deep these African folk were. I am constantly awed at the fundamental biological brilliance of our people. I have no problem understanding why they treat us this way. I have no problem understanding this, and I'm surprised that we're just sitting back not aware. You know, but yeah, brother, but you know, we're sleeping like we got a whole lap full of gold, and we're not even conscious that there are people watching us want to steal it. You see, we're sitting with gold all around us, our wisdom, our knowledge. What we could do in this room with that building you're going to buy, you could create a university where people from around the world will want to come to study with you the way we want to send our children to Oxford University. You have it in your power to create universities that go beyond everything that exists in the world today. We have the ability to create another Timbuktu, or another Walata, or another Gazagamu in Nigeria, or Katsina. We can create the Ifit at Waset, or the Grand Lodge of Luxor. We have it within us to do that. Right fundamentally with just what we have right here. If we could just get a building and then begin to formulate that building. I guarantee you this, and we're going to do this. Yeah. The third string was called Musalaf. This fourth string was 2 times the size of the second string. It was white in color, and it represented phlegm. Phlegm. Spittle and mucus. Okay? The fourth string was called Bam. It was 2 times the size of the third string. It was black. And it represented hormones. What you secrete, your melatonin, your serotonin, your salivary glands, all the things that are released through your endocrine system, all of your glands that throw off all these, your immune system, all this. Bam, black. And there's a reason why it's black. Okay? This is some heavy stuff here. I was just flabbergasted because you're going to see something when all this is done. Okay. They said, the Moors, that just like everything in life has its opposite, that these, in fact, were opposing strings. And that in the guitar, you could sing the song of life in a guitar if you understood how to strum what string when. So music is not just about playing in harmony, although you do that. Music, it can soothe the savage beast. That's where it came from. The concept of music. Music is not entertainment to boogie down. Music is that when you play music and you dance, it heals you. And it does. Think about sometimes when you hear a song you haven't heard in a long time. It's just a song that it can bring back floods of memory, and you could be having a terrible day and your day brightens up at that point. Because it's touched your melanic composite and it's brought you to another level of vibration, which takes you beyond that lower level to a higher level. This is what music was to African people. But this is what they said. The first string, or the zer, bile, was hot and dry. That's what they said that string was. Zer was hot and dry. They said that Muthana, which represented blood, was cold and wet. They said that Muthala, which represented phlegm, was cold and dry. And they said that Bam, which represented hormones, was hot and wet. Which, by the way, black should be. Because black is the origin of things, and the origin of things is water. So it should be hot and wet. Heat and wet creates life, and it's black. So it does follow. Ziriab said, there's something else we have to do. Ziriab was the brother that changed the way in which people dressed in Al-Andalus. He said, you know, you people jump from being winter clothes to summer clothes. He said, let me tell you something. There's a season in here called spring that I think not only should you change your form of dress, but you should change the fabric. So this brother brought from all around the world different fabrics. He changed the way in which people dressed. He noticed that Europeans and basically Al-Andalus, when they sat down and ate, they just sat down and ate everything. They ate a little bit of dessert, they ate a little bit of this, they ate some bread, they ate vegetables, they ate meat. He said, no, soup to nuts. He said, we're going to break this up into courses, because he understood the digestive system of the body. And so that's why when you first start eating, you eat fruit, because fruit is what assimilates best in your body first. Then you go to your things that are like your salad, roughage. And then you go through your meal, you see. And then you don't drink. You either drink a half hour before or after. So you don't even have anything to drink at your table. You should have nothing at your table to drink when you're eating. It shouldn't even be on the table. Because you should not be eating and drinking at the same time. Not to mention some of the things that you do at the table. But I'll have to come back and talk. We have to talk about health and nutrition about that. Forget the more, we have to talk about health and nutrition. So when we're going to plot this on the map, this is what we then start looking at. We see that we are going to say this is wet, this is dry, this is hot, this is cold. We have Bam, Muthana. On this end we have Zer, and we have Muthala. Ziriab said, there's something missing. Ziriab added a fifth string to this lute, because he said what was missing was the soul. And so what he did was that in the middle of the Muthalath and Muthana, he created a fifth string, which was red, and because of the carbon concept, it represented what we today call plasma. This is science now. Plasma is a liquid that you can't see. Whenever you hear people talk about the cosmos, they're talking about plasma, because plasma is what they refer to. When they're talking about the spirit in the universe, they call it plasma. It is a liquid that can't be seen. It's almost like an ether. It's a liquid, but at the same time, it is invisible. This is what he added. He added the fifth string to the lute that brought soul music into the piece that he was doing. But not just that. What is also key to understand and to know is something known as the theory of humors. And the theory of humors says that the object of music was to restore the equilibrium of the soul in the same way that medicine was supposed to restore the equilibrium of the body humors. Ziria became the most fashionable arbiter of taste in the 9th century. So what they were basically saying in terms of this concept of the theory of the humors was that when you play music, according to how you play music, that a doctor should be a musician also. That even when you go to a dentist's office now, you'll notice they're playing music. You'll notice that they're playing music in a lot of different areas. What I am suggesting in our classrooms, at least beginning with art and beginning with other subjects, we must introduce the music, and that was one of the reasons why I was going to have the Miles Davis piece and the John Coltrane played for you, because I could have told you that upon listening to that music and then listening to this presentation, you would have assimilated something. As opposed, see, we're learning in silence too much. The reality is that music, particularly jazz, and even parts of hip-hop, can be used. Not all music. Now, I'm not just saying play music. I'm saying there are kinds of musics that can be played, particularly with quarterphones. Quarterphones are stringed instrument that can be played, and while it is played, it can help you. It becomes like an escort of knowledge into your mind to become comprehended by what it is that you're learning. And this is what they were aware of in terms of the development. They understood the opposites. They understood music. They had drums. They had all sorts of quarterphones. They had this kind of concept in Africa that they then brought into Europe that we now today, because now they'll tell you in a minute now classical music, but classical music comes directly out of the Moors. In fact, a harp, a piano is a harp turned sideways. You see, they don't have it in their hands to be able to play the harp, so they never could play the harp properly. So what they did was to offset their inability to be able to play the harp, they turned it sideways and encased it in wood. And instead of strumming the harp this way, they hit keys that then would pump and hit the string another way. And that was the creation of the piano. Not to mention, of course, that the Moors created the piano because they brought the wood from Africa to build it. My brothers and sisters, there's so much more that we can say, but one of the things that I really want to leave us with is an understanding. It's the same understanding that I leave us with every time I get a chance to come before you, and that there is nothing new under the sun. I have brought a few copies of a piece that I did. It's called Kinetic. Kinetic in the Native American language of the Haudenosaunee, or who are called the Iroquois, means the great law of peace.